Paul, before we start, can I just ask, are we going to use the electronic hand? Oh, it's not a huge number of, I can see people's hands raised, if that's okay. Is that you're on mute, Paul.
Whatever's comfortable for you, Chair. If you feel confident you can see everybody, then that's fine. Otherwise, I can just call out the names as normal, or whatever you prefer.
No, I think I'll be okay. I can see everyone. I can see their hands go up. As long as somebody counts, in case there is a disputed vote. I don't know.
Yeah, I've got my calculator in front of me. So.
Are we live, Paul?
We are live at the moment. Yeah, I'm just waiting for 7 o'clock.
I had muted and it went silent. I was unsure.
Okay, Chair, it's 7 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Paul. Good evening, councillors, council officers, members of the press or public who may be watching us on YouTube. I welcome you to this meeting of the One Corby Policy Committee. And can I begin by asking if there are any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. I have apologies from Councillor Isles, Councillor Pengelly, Councillor Paul Beattie and Councillor Watt, and we have Councillors Colquhoun, DL and Welling substituting.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on, declarations of interest. Members are asked to declare any personal interest they may have in the business to be discussed, and if they could indicate whether this is prejudicial or non-prejudicial, the nature of any interest, and whether they intend participating in the relevant agenda item. Any councillors wish to declare an interest? Appears not. No? Okay, can we therefore then move to the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 6th of October. And can I see a mover, please, to approve the minutes? Councillor Addison moved, seconded by Councillor Colquhoun. If anyone beat somebody else to the punch there, I'm sorry. Those were the two hands I saw first. So all in favour of receiving the minutes, please show. Okay, they're approved. So we move into the one open item on tonight's agenda, which is the proposal for the establishment of a Corby Town Council. And can I see Paul Gold to please present this report?
Thank you, Chair. The report before members is intended to take us on the next stage of working towards having a Corby Town Council. As members will recall, there was some discussion on this some time ago. Work on it has been slow, partly due to obviously the situation we found ourselves in this year, together with other work commitments, but we are still able to establish a town council if that is the wish of members. The purpose of this paper, as I say, is to take us to the next stage, which will be to set, if you like, some broad principles, parameters, in which officers can go away and start drawing up more detailed plans. Obviously, full council will have the final decision as to what the creation of the Corby Town Council will look like. and is intended to bring a more detailed report to all members at full council in December. We obviously, working through this exercise, have come across a number of issues where we feel that we need some expert external advice. And our colleagues at the Northamptonshire Association of Local Councils have gladly offered some service and advice up to this point, but are also willing to assist us in the more detailed work that's needed over the next few months. And you will see in the report there is a recommendation to employ them as consultants in order that we can progress that work. What I'd like to do, Chair, because this is a very important report, obviously, is just go very quickly through the general principles that are detailed in the report from page 2 of the report and give a bit more background to some of the issues. And then obviously I'll quite happily take questions. So obviously we are duty bound to ensure, if we decide to establish a town council, that it is a safe and legal entity, and we need to tick a number of boxes in order to do that. Obviously, currently we are envisaging that the vesting day for the new town council would be the 1st of April, which is obviously the first day of the new unitary council. In relation to transfer of assets, there are certain things which we are required to do by statute. So, for example, allotments is a matter that would, by statute, need to be transferred to the town council. Our colleagues in Kettering, who are slightly ahead of us in this process, a few weeks ago, they agreed to the transfer of their allotments and, in fact, their market charter. Obviously, we don't have a market charter. So there is a very narrow definition of what needs to be transferred across to the town council. In relation to the item 4, which is the financial impact and the introduction of a precept, obviously the town council needs to be self-funding. And the way that that would be done is by introducing a town council precept, which would be included with the main council tax bill for residents each year. If I can share my screen at this point, Chair, I just want to give, hopefully all members of the committee can see this. This is for this current financial year, and this shows the tax base for each of the existing parishes within Corby Borough, together with details of the unparished area. And you will also see, and this is obviously based on Band D, which is the norm for these sort of reports, an idea of the precept that is levied by the parished areas. The interesting thing I think I would want members to note is that the current total tax base for Corby Borough Council, as you see, is this figure here, 20,085. However, the tax base for the Corby Town Council would actually be this figure here, 15,513. So whilst it might be tempting to think of the tax base that we have at the moment as a borough council, the tax base for the town council, if created, would be roughly about 25% less than it is for the borough council. So in other words, there would be 15,500 properties who currently are liable to pay council tax, and the precept would be levied against those properties. These properties obviously already pay a precept to their parish councils and so are excluded from consideration. I'll just stop sharing there. So it's obviously important that the town council has a precept. The precept would be set by the borough council because obviously it needs to go into the main council tax bill with the council tax from the unitary, from the precept from the police, etc., etc. So it would be included in that. Obviously, it would take effect from the 1st of April. So it needs to be set by the Borough Council for the first financial year, which would be 21-22, but obviously the Town Council itself would decide on its own precept level going forward. In terms of item 5, the ward boundaries, the proposal, as stated in the report, is that they reflect the ward boundaries for the new unitary council. And this is basically a suggestion for 2 or 3 reasons. First of all, obviously the unitary council elections will be fought, as you may be aware, on the county council division boundaries. And it was felt to reflect and make it simpler for all concerned that the town council boundaries would reflect those ward boundaries for the unitary. Firstly, because it would be a cheaper exercise for the town council, because the town council will have to pay its own election costs. So the first thing it's going to have early on in its life is a bill from the unitary for its election costs. Now, those election costs will obviously be shared. They'll be shared with the unitary elections. They'll be shared with the police elections. But obviously, to make life easier and cheaper, it's suggested that we reflect those boundaries. Secondly, it will make it easier for officers, members, and members of the public to actually understand what boundaries they are within and who their representatives are. So you would have, in effect, 3 unitary councillors, and then you would have up to 4 town councillors, and they would basically cover the same patch, and it would allow for some synergy between the unitary councillors and the town councillors. The county council divisions do not currently reflect our ward boundaries. Councillor McGee's on the meeting, and he will confirm that his ward boundaries for the county are different from those of his ward. And that can lead to some confusion sometimes, and particularly with the town council starting off, obviously, in its first year. Having that synergy between the representatives will be really helpful, particularly for the public, because they will obviously there will be a big exercise ahead of the unitary and the town council coming into being. But if someone is living in one part of a ward, they should know who their unitary councillors are and who their town councillors are, and they would be the same for another part of the ward, and we wouldn't get into any of that confusion about who does what. Moving on briefly, that would, I should just point out, obviously, as you see in the report, the one exception to that is Corby Old Village, because Corby Old Village, the polling district at Corby Old Village, is currently included in Corby Rural, and obviously the rest of Corby Rural is excluded from this exercise. So we would have to, on this occasion, make a special arrangement for Corby Old Village as a polling district. Bear in mind, these are only draft proposals, and we can still work on these between now and December. That would obviously give us, in total, we're proposing about 17 town councillors, which basically we feel is about the right number. Kettering, I think, went with 20. I think Wellingborough was slightly more than that. But 17 gives us about the right number, and will hopefully ensure that all members of the council can be engaged in the running of the town council, should it establish various committees and so on, which it will have to do. There are certain committees it would have to have. It would have to have a planning committee so that it could respond to planning applications and consultations. It would need a personnel committee. And it would need some form of finance committee. And the idea would be, if you have a reasonable size council with a reasonable number of councillors, you can get everybody engaged in the town council. Moving on, we would obviously look to transfer the civic regalia that currently is held by Corby Borough Council to the town council, as 1 or 2 of the ex-mayors. Have we got 1 or 2? We've got 1 ex-mayor on the, no, we've got 2 ex-mayors on the line. 3 ex-mayors on the line, apologies. As you all know, the civic regalia currently states it's Corby Borough Council, so we would have to make arrangements to amend that. So it read Corby Town Council. I should point out at this stage that we cannot actually legislate that the town council will have a mayor. That's something they would have to decide at their first meeting. So they would actually, under law, have to elect a chairman or chairwoman, chairperson at their first meeting, and then make a resolution later on in the meeting to rename that as a mayor if they wish to do that. We're also looking at the Corby crest, the civic crest. That's obviously aligned with the civic regalia. We would also need to try and find accommodation for the town council. Now, obviously, it has to, as it were, pay its way, but an accommodation, I'm sure, could be reached between the borough council and the town council to ensure that it has suitable office space and that meeting accommodation can be provided in some way. We can also look to try and ensure that it has certain basics like tables and chairs, so that it's got something in its office space for when it begins. We do need to consider, as part of this exercise, staffing for the town council. The town council will not have any staff when it starts, but it is required, obviously, to have at least a town clerk. And again, this comes back to my earlier reference to our colleagues from the Association of Local Councils. They would help us to develop job descriptions. At the moment, we're envisaging the potential for up to 2 full-time equivalent posts. That would be a town clerk, a responsible financial officer, which is their equivalent of the Section 151, and an admin assistant. Those 2 later posts, we're talking about being part-time at this stage, but again, this is just a proposal that we can work on. Obviously, it will have to have a range of documentation, starting with the constitution, standing orders, etc., etc. That all needs to be developed. It obviously needs to have various insurances in place from day one, public liability insurance, employer insurances, etc. Excuse me, Chair, apologies. And obviously we need to ensure it has a bank account and payroll function so that it can pay its member or members of staff. We also need to sort out subscriptions to the Information Commissioner's Office. I would strongly advise to the Association of Local Councils, and there may be other organisations that it's deemed appropriate for it to be subscribed to. And then obviously we need to ensure that in that transition phase, before it has employed staff, that there is adequate staffing cover from somewhere, and that's to be agreed, so that it can call its first meeting, etc., etc. Right. Chair, I'm happy to take questions at this point, and I think I already have one lined up.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. That was a very clear, I think, explanation of what's contained within the report, but the additional clarification I think was helpful. So I'll open it up then to questions from councillors. Councillor Colquhoun, I think.
Yeah, just very, very broadly speaking, Paul, I know it's very early days, but would the town's council have a sort of similar status to a parish council as at present?
Well, it would be defined as a local council, but I mean, obviously, given its size, you know, it would have financially and, dare I say, politically, probably a bit more influence than just a parish council. There are very similar
Yeah.
beats, if I can put it that way. But given the size of Corby, if it goes ahead, and obviously we have Kettering and Wellingborough already have agreed to, well, Wellingborough's is already in situ. Kettering have agreed to create their town council. So these would be quite sizable political, with a small p, bodies within Northamptonshire.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wellings had her hand up. Alexandra, over to you. You're muted at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, one of my questions was going to be, is this a bipartisan or apolitical? I'm not sure which term is preferable. Is this a non-political environment?
Nothing in local government is ever non-political, councillor. The simple fact is that's up to the the town council. You could have people standing as independents, or they could stand as party candidates. That's entirely up to them. You could have that at parish council level. So it isn't set up to be a party political beast, if I can put it that way. But if parties wish to nominate candidates, they can do so. If individuals wish to stand as independents, they can do so. It's no different really from any other election in that sense. I mean, in terms of, in some places there may be a bit of a convention that people don't stand as party candidates, but there's no legal requirement saying they can't stand, restriction I should say, saying they can't stand as a party candidate. So it's basically up for grabs, whoever wants to put their candidate form to.
Is that decision made before this is formed, or?
Well, that's just the law. I mean, if someone stands for political office, and this is political office, a town councillor would be a political office, as is a parish councillor, it is entirely up to them if they stand as an independent or whether they wish to stand as a party candidate. And obviously they would have to get the authorization of the respective party to be able to do that. So it's no different from a unitary council or a parish council or a town council or the police commissioner. If they wish to stand as a party candidate, they can do so.
Yeah, I don't think it's within our gift to say that we could set up something which was, non-political or bipartisan. This isn't. This is an organisation which is about government at a particular level, and it's up to the local political parties whether they want to stand candidates. There is a tradition, I think, in some areas, certainly among some smaller parish and town councils, where most of the councillors are independent, but that's their choice. So as Paul has said, this is legislative. There's nothing we can do to say we're not going to let this become a political, forum. It will be what it will be. Councillor Sims, I think, had his hand up.
Sorry, Chair, Councillor McGee has had his hand up for a very long time. I don't think you've spotted him.
Sorry, John, you were in the position that David is currently in and you moved. So I didn't see you. So, yeah, I'll go with you then first, John, and then I'll come to David. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Chair. I thought you were just ignoring me for a minute. I'm glad that the Monitoring Officer Paul has described that in full detail, because we shouldn't forget why we're in this situation. The Conservative County Council failed Northamptonshire, so the dictate from government is that we go into 2 unitaries, and that means the end of Corby Borough Council. And I think it's important to remember that, because we were just talking about the political divides. But Chair, I'm glad, because this is about localism. It's about what we in Corby, what we, the people of Corby, want for our area. Because when we go into North Northamptonshire, we don't know where the headquarters will be. It could be away from Corby and Kettering, East Northants, Wellingborough. So we would really like a true say about what happens in Corby. And that takes me on to page 2, number 3, Paul, where it says the Corby Borough Council make arrangements for transfer only of those assets, liabilities and responsibilities to the Town Council by legislation. I truly believe we have an opportunity before April and May to talk with the shadow North Northamptonshire Unitary to see what else we would like responsibility for. And that includes things like the woodlands, where we know Corby Borough Council has been given significant money to look after our woodlands. So it should be Corby Town Council that's managing that. And that includes things, Chair, and under my opinion, things like our small parks around the estates, things like our community centres. And I recognise that it's not straightforward and money has to be devolved to the town council to manage these things. But I would rather that we had some sort of cross-party group discussing it, or even with officers discussing that before we went in there, so that we're running the most important things that we can, or as much as we can, for the people of Corby in Corby. That may seem a small thing, but it's important. Localism for our town is important, because we're losing our town council, our borough council, and we will have a town council that doesn't have as much powers. So I only believe we should take that opportunity now to have the debates about some of the things I've mentioned. And I hope Tom and the leadership can look to try and get a cross-party group to have the discussions along with our officers of what can be devolved before and as soon as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Hey, John, thank you. Paul, do you want to respond to that?
I know the point the council's making, and one of the things.
Sorry, Paul, we can't hear you. Your microphone's distorted very badly.
I may have to come in on another line, Chair.
It really is quite bad.
Line. Excuse me.
Yeah, shall we go on to the next person that wants to ask questions, and then we can come back to Paul?
Are you almost with us, Paul, or should I ask Councillor Sims to come in?
Can you hear me? Can you
Want
hear?
to try again?
Sorry, can you hear?
You've got the mute button on at your screen at the moment.
You've got two screens.
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
Let me hold on. Right, can you hear me?
That is perfect again. Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully I'll survive on this. Okay. Sorry about that, Chair. Right. In answer to Councillor McGee's point, I fully understand the point he's making. I think the issue well, certainly from my perspective in writing this report, is there was a desire to ensure, obviously, that any precept levied was kept as low as possible, because the town council is obviously starting with no reserves. It's actually starting probably with no staff. And we have to bear in mind this is going to be an additional tax on local residents. Having said that, Councillor McGee is absolutely right that I think it's perfectly appropriate that the town council, together with the other new town councils, because we're not going to be unique in this, our colleagues in Kettering and Wellingborough will be the same, have those discussions with the unitary about what local services in those areas can reasonably be transferred or devolved to the local town councils. But we have to bear in mind that the town councils are starting with virtually a blank sheet of paper. They've got no reserves, and they're going to have to build up their own reserves to cover costs. So anything that is devolved from the unitary really needs to come, as I think the councillor said, with some sort of grant or budget with it. So that, yes, those discussions need to be had. Perfectly agree with that. I think those are going to take some time to do. And I don't think there's any problem with flagging up with the new, if you like, officer leadership of the unitary, that we are keen for Corby Town Council to have that sort of discussion. So I'm not dismissing the suggestion, well, not that I would dare dismiss the suggestion from Councillor McGee, but I think we have to do so in a measured approach to make sure that the money is in the bank, if you like, before we commit to doing anything, because otherwise that's going to fall on local taxpayers. And in essence, they could end up, in some cases, paying twice for the same thing, which obviously none of us would want.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul. I think that's understood in terms of ongoing discussions. I think quite correct for Councillor McGee to identify things that the town council might want to take on, but with the caveat that you've introduced, and I think early discussions with the officer leading the shadow authority at the moment into the unitary council wouldn't be a bad thing. I've got Councillor Sims, and then I think Councillor Keane has got his hand up. So David Sims first, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd just like to mention a couple of things, if I may. First of all, I agree with what Paul has said. We have to be very, very careful. It is an extra tax on the people of Corby. We have to make sure we can walk before we run, make sure that we don't burden the people of Corby by paying for services more than once and put an extra financial pressure on the people in the borough. But I do think it's worth looking ahead, planning ahead to see what we can do to put things in place in the near future. I also think it's extremely important that we work with the new unitary and that we have a good relationship with them. And it was mentioned at the start of this meeting about the town council being partisan. Now, it's already been discussed that it's down to the council, but I think that the last survey was done some time ago. I did read somewhere, I think about 48% of town councils are, when that was done about 3 years ago, were political groups. And that, so not all town councils are, but I would like to think in the future we wouldn't be as political as we have been, because it is about the people of Corby. I support us having a town council. I think it's the right thing to do, and I'm glad to see that the civic regalia will go over with the possibility of a mayor. Again, we have to look at the costs, because as it's already been said, we'll start off with zero balance basically. So we have to build up reserves and make sure we're not spending more than what we've got, because I don't want that burden to go on to the public any more than it has to. But I think it's a good thing, and Corby's, it gives us a voice locally, like parish councils do, and we will be consulted on planning applications. We won't be making decisions, but we will be consulted, and that's important that we are. So it's a good thing, and I'm looking forward to us going ahead. But one thing I do have to say, and I don't want to make a big thing of this, but I do have to say this, in answer to Councillor John McGee, and that he goes on, it's the county council's fault that we're in this position. I believe that it certainly sped up things to becoming a unitary, but it was talked about a few years ago. So, and there are numbers of local authorities that have had devolution and gone into unitary. And we've got to remember, Corby's not as clean. We've got history in our previous leadership where Corby was in serious trouble. And so it's not, you shan't be throwing stones from a glass house. We had problems in the past, and so have many other councils. But we shouldn't be talking about the past. We should be talking about the future and looking to what we can do to make this place, it's a good town, let's make it better. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there are any questions in that contribution from Councillor Sims, Paul, so I don't think you need to respond unless you feel
No,
the need to.
No, I don't feel the need to. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Keane, then, please.
Right, yeah, obviously only the current unparished areas of Corby Borough are going to be included in this town council. I just think it is a shame for parts of the other parishes who could identify themselves as being part of Corby that they won't be included in the town council. Have any of the smaller parishes been consulted, or have they had any comments to make about Corby Borough, the Corby Town Council? And also, there's going to be quite a lot of interest in Corby Town Council because it's going to be the identity of the Corby people. So would it be worth having like a small working group of councillors to put ideas and to liaise with the public about what we're going to do with the town council?
Well, one of the reasons for in answer to your first question about consultation with parishes, we did some consultation with parishes some time ago as part one of the exercise. The only response I recall receiving was from, I think it was Stanion Parish Council, who welcomed the proposal. I think it will be welcomed that there is a town council in Corby. In relation, I think we have to be a bit careful in terms of how we go forward on this, because we have to remember the town councillors who are actually going to be running this town council aren't even elected yet. And we have a duty to obviously establish the town council and do what we are required to do under statute. But we have to be mindful that they are the ones who are going to get the mandate, if you like, from the general public at the election. So whilst, yes, we, as Councillor McGee mentioned earlier, there are a few ideas and things that we can start to float around and get an idea of how it may develop and so on. It is going to have to grow to a degree itself, and we need to be careful about tying its hands too much, because it will be the town councillors who are elected who will define what that town council will grow and develop into. Does that answer your question, Councillor? So I'm not dismissing the idea totally, but all I'm saying is a word of caution that, we can't try and rebuild something or build something too much, because it is going to be for other people, other officers, as well as other members to work together to develop that town council going forward over the future years.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Right, I've got a couple of people who've already spoken, indicating they want to speak again, but I'm not going to call them until I give an opportunity to those who haven't. And I think Councillor Addison has just put her hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Calhoun as well. It's not a question about the parish council or the town council. I just wanted to remind Councillor Sims he might want to reread the Cala report to find out why we're in this position. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Councillor Calhoun, did you want to say something else?
No, Councillor Addison has just said it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Willie. Yes, Councillor Wellings, please.
Thank you. Councillor Keane, just to address your point about the parish, I did raise it at the parish meeting about the town council being created at the Weldon Parish Council, this was, and we had a discussion. And whilst they were interested to hear it was happening, it has been quite insightful to me of how self-sufficient they are, that watching the Gretton and the Weldon Parish Councils, they get an awful lot done on a month-to-month basis. So yeah, I definitely think having a local set of eyes on a local area is the right way to go, and in particular from being part of those councils. And the only reason going back to the political point, the only reason I am sitting here right now is because I couldn't breathe in my own home because of the Mick George landfill. And I desperately couldn't understand why local council wasn't getting involved to the point where they were helping us. So yeah, local eyes on local situations, absolutely imperative. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't want this to turn into an argument about why we're here or how we got here or who's to blame. We're here to talk about the establishment of a town council, which from the word go, I think when we knew that we were moving towards unitary, there was always a feeling that we would establish a town council. What we're not trying to do and what we can't do, and basically legislatively would be impossible, is to recreate Corby Borough Council under a different name. We're talking about creating a town council with different responsibilities. And some of those responsibilities still to be decided, but those things I think will be decided by those people who are elected to the town council, and rightly so, as will the policies of the North Northamptonshire Unitary Council ultimately be decided by the people who are elected to that body on the 6th of May next year. Now, the Shadow Authority, of course, is charged with establishing the Unitary Authority. But in terms of that body's ongoing policy development, that's not a consideration for us, and nor should it be. There will be 78 councillors elected, I think, on May the 6th next year, who will form the Unitary Council. They will make those decisions going forward. If this is agreed and we move forward, on the same day we'll elect 17 town councillors in Corby for the Corby Town Council, and they will do the job of that body. So I think we just need to focus on that. I mean, I would just say, however, that I don't recall at any point in any discussions over the last 10 years that I've had with colleagues from Kettering, Wellingborough, East Northants or elsewhere, a request to establish a unitary authority. It didn't happen. It never happened. What we did ask for was some sort of combined authority, which is a completely different animal. The creation of the Unitary Council, factually, and it can't be denied, the creation of the Unitary Council was decided by a government inspector, as Jean has rightly pointed out in the Max Caller report, and that was because of the failure of the County Council. That can't be denied. To deny it is to fly in the face of logic. And at no point until that happened was there ever a request made to establish a Unitary Council. So I think it's important that facts are established, and that's as much as I'm going to allow on that issue. Unless anybody has any other, no, I'm not going to take any more comments unless it's specifically about the town council. I'm not prepared to engage. People have had two goes. Councillor Wellings, is this a question about the report in front of?
Yes, I've never said anything political. So, Paul, when we talk about the wards and the coterminous continuation of them, how are they? How are they formed? Because if I look at the map of where the wards sit, is it done by number of houses, number of residents? How does that work?
Right, that's a whole session in itself. The first thing I would say is that, for example, the unitary wards, the county divisions, that was subject of an independent review of the boundaries. And I should have said in my introduction that although the elections in May will be fought on the current boundaries, there will be a review by the boundary committee, the local government boundary commission, rather, sometime during the next few years. So that it's conducted by an independent body, and they take into account population, electorate size, yes, and also local identity, community identity, although that always seems to be the first thing to go when the numbers don't add up, to be perfectly honest. Councillor McGee's nodding. But so it's based on a number of factors, but obviously ensuring that ratio of councillor to electorate is the same across the council, so that the number of electors you represent is the same as the number that Councillor DL represents, and so on and so forth. But it is conducted, those ones are conducted by an independent body, and there will be a review of the unitary council's divisions. And at that time, I would suggest that the town council would want to have a review of its arrangements, so it was fitted in.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. John, I'm sorry, I did realise that you had your hand up previously. Do you still want to?
I won't go on to the first point. You've labelled the point about not being political, and I am a political animal, but I'll stay off it because you're right. We have to move forward regardless of the mistakes of the Conservative County Council. So what I will say is that it's quite difficult when you come to the boundaries. In the Kingswood, it's called Kingswood Division. It takes in Hazelleys, all of Hazelleys, Kingswood, part of Rockledale and part of Beanfields. And that's because the numbers didn't add up, as Paul's quite rightly said. But it does make it difficult when you're trying to manage that. But when the review comes, hopefully we can straighten some of that out. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. Paul.
Yes, sorry, Chair. I haven't got the figures to hand, and I apologise for this because I didn't think it would come up. But I think I worked out on the ratio of unitary councillors to electorate, it's actually going to be less than it currently is for councillor to obviously county councillor, but more than it is for councillor to electorate to borough councillor. So it's somewhere in the middle, but it is actually fairly consistent across the piece in Corby. The numbers are all fairly within a very tight range. So no councillors should either be disadvantaged or advantaged in terms of the number of electorate they have.
Okay. I don't see any further hands up. We've had a good 45 minutes or so at this. So can we therefore move to the recommendations on paragraph 6? The recommendations, 5 of them are in front of you. Can I see someone to move the recommendation, please? That's moved by Councillor Addison. Can I have a seconder for the recommendations? Councillor Colquhoun. Okay, all those in favour of the recommendation, please show. Okay, I think that's carried. Yeah, that's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Chair, I will ask my colleague Laura to, whilst you're reading out the exclusion paragraph, to terminate the live stream to YouTube. Laura, if you can start that process. Just for the public's benefit, we're now going into exempt session and consider a confidential report.
Okay.